Hello, I'm Jean Dean, and we're at the Milwaukee Theosophical Society in March 2019, and I'm giving a presentation on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, also called the Bardo Photo. And another name for this work is the Great Liberation Upon Hearing in the Intermediate States. My background with this is I've read it 6 times, and I've had some amazing experiences, every one of them unique, and every one of them is a whole unveiling of the thousand-petal lotus of insight. And I especially want to give thanks to Richard Yar, who's here tonight, who helped me with his notes, and he had done a talk on this, and it was very a good pointer to set me off, and I completely followed the lead that Richard, who's been a great meditator with our circle, and so I thank you for that. And probably one other thing I'd like to mention is how this work has changed my life, and maybe I'll digress as we go along. Recently, a very close friend of mine, Martha, died just a few months ago, and I promised her I would read this for her again. And in so doing, a lot of amazing things happened, and I might mention some of those along the way. And she was an accomplished meditator herself, and a dear, dear presence. So that process led me to think about presenting it here, and my own desire to learn it better. So that's kind of where this talk came out of. And actually, this statement here, the Great Liberation Upon Hearing in the Intermediate State, come on in, was something that I didn't really notice in my prior reads. That this document is meant to be heard, and of course part of it is read to the dying and the deceased. I have a copy in my bag over here. Would someone be kind enough to pull it out? It should be pretty obvious. So we'll go forward then. So the Bardo Photo is a Tibetan work, and it has the idea mentioned by some of the commentaries of being the science of dying, or the science of death. And so how can such a thing be? So it's set up as a guidance for people passing through the Bardo of dying, and Bardo means intermediate state, and the text is to be read. Which is different than other kinds of meditation practices. I mean, we go inside and we visualize, we say mantra, but this is meant to be read. And it's detailed instruction on how to traverse the mythical afterlife states. The ultimate goal for any practitioner of Buddhism is liberation, and liberation in particular from reincarnation, or not to be reborn. And if that's not possible, then the Tibetan Book of the Dead offers some means to pick an auspicious life, a future life. And the principle also is that both proficient yogic practitioners as well as ordinary people can be helped through the Tibetan Book of the Dead to find either liberation or a good afterlife, I mean a rebirth. If one recognizes the Bardo, and you can make an enlightened decision. So in that respect, the Book of the Dead is also a guide for living. And there's not any other system that has such a process of explanation of the afterlife as this work. So here we have Shakespeare's famous quote, Hamlet: "Who would these burdens bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will." So Hamlet's asking, about to live or die, and the business of going into that consummation to be devoutly desired, right? But in the West, we think of death as something that is limited, a life is limited, we go to heaven or hell, and that's completely contrary to the idea of reincarnation and encapsulated in Buddhism. So Buddhism claims that we are all travelers who return again and again from the forgotten land of past lives. And because of memory of all this could be daunting, we are wired to forget. And the gift of memory comes to adepts who master certain yogas and aspects of ego such that the veil is removed and they are able to recall other lives. The Dalai Lama, for instance, has this ability, as recounted in his autobiography. He described his own self-recognition. The Tulku tradition in Tibetan Buddhism, which are lineages of great teachers who will return, and again out of compassion. They could stay liberated on the other side, but they return to help humanity. And in the 20th century, with the work of East and West, and the idea of reincarnation started to become more accepted again after it had been suppressed in the Judeo-Christian idea, and people are starting to have remembrance of past lives, and certainly some of that comes out of the work of the Theosophical Society and Madame Blavatsky opening our doors to Eastern tradition, and we'll talk more about that. So Buddha is another example of rebirth. Here's a statement, in recollection, all former births passed before his eyes, born in such a place of such a name and downwards to his present birth. So through hundreds, thousands, myriads, all his births and deaths he knew. So the biography of the Buddha is not one but many lives. His recall is a proof of rebirth and his attainment. There's a work called The Tales of the Buddha's Past Lives that record 357 as a human, 66 as a god, and 123 as an animal. One famous story is of a diva who and another is as a wheelwright. And many of the stories in this accounts have moral lessons having to do with bodhisattva, good practice, and liberation. But Buddha provides instructions for his followers to have this ability to remember. And another aspect of remembering is discovering the work of karma in our present life. So this is what Buddha said, through many a birth wandered I, seeking the builder of this house. Sorrowful indeed is birth again and again. Yeah, and Plato, his Republic, is loaded with accounts of reincarnation, and in particular a soldier named Er, who is believed dead but comes back, has a near-death experience and recounts his journey in the afterlife, and sees and witnesses all these famous people like Agamemnon and Ajax and Orpheus choosing their future lives. So from that we get this idea of choice, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead has some things to say about that. Other proponents of rebirth are Pindar, Pythagoras, Socrates, the Eleusinian and the Orphic mysteries. And here's another quote from Buddha. This very raving is that which leads to rebirth. This is my last birth. Now there is no more. So that was Buddha's statement of finality to his own life journey. Here is a little bit on the Tibetan Lama tradition. So on the You're right, is the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, is a very young man, probably on his transition from Tibet to the West. And the other is the 13th Dalai Lama, who would be his same soul incarnation. Somewhere in the 19-teens, I think that photograph was taken. So I just thought it was interesting to put them together. So reincarnation, the reason I'm showing you this is sort of the keystone of Tibetan Buddhism. And again, this work, this book, is very much fundamental to Buddhism. And along with the Dalai Lama, there's the Panchen Lama, who's from the other tradition of Kagyu, I believe, and he also reincarnates and is found, and again the lineage of Tulkus. And I remember meeting here in Milwaukee some years ago, forgive me, I can't remember her name, a great Tulku who had reincarnated for the first time as a woman. And she talked about living in a place with other women and the petty arguments and and being baffled by many things of the feminine experience. And of course within Buddhism, one of the injunctions in the past centuries was, oh God, let me reincarnate as a man, because it was believed that a man could attain liberation but a woman could not because of the attachments of the womb and such. So anyway, that was very interesting for that Lama to have come in as a woman. And I had a pleasant little conversation about that. Having been a feminist, really on my game of womanhood. So that's another story. So the idea of reincarnation plays into one of the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, that being, well, they're listed here, suffering is universal, and the second truth is that the cause of suffering is attachment, and suffering can be ended, and the path to ending suffering is detachment, and that is part of the heart of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the idea is...
You need a new English word to describe dukkha, because it's not suffering. It's not feeling satiated.
Okay, not feeling complete.
The desire for something over the hill.
Mm-hmm. And certainly, well, the three kinds of desire are for sensual pleasure, the desire to become, oh, I wanted to get it right. I want to write my masterpiece. The desire to get rid of, oh, if I could just stop this chronic illness. So all of those lead to attachments. So in terms of the Bardo Thodo, this text encapsulates the problem of suffering and attachment. In Buddhism, rebirth is a mechanism with procedures that can be mastered by learning. Attachment and karma make humans captive riders on the wheel of life, also called the Dharma wheel. Contrary to Western New Age ideas of active subjects choosing and controlling their script through multiple lives, the view in Buddhism is that it's a little more, we have a role of choice, definitely, but it's a little more sophisticated than that. And there are certain rules that guide the game, or, that cause water to flow south in a river. So we have to work with the physics of it. So Bardo Thodo and other practices are all directed to overcoming attachment and karma. The focus is to detach from the desire to live, be, or accomplish. I think of phrases like a very famous song by a singer, I always thought I would see you one more time again. Mm-hmm. There's a major desire that would be driving someone forward on the karmic wheel to have another life. The whole thing, one more time, or the simple more. I haven't had enough for my bucket list. These are all examples of karmic fuel that keep the wheel of rebirth turning. So here's a picture of the Dharma wheel called the Bhava Chakra, and it's got this ugly, wrathful deity holding the wheel and being, warning, have caution. And it's broken up into a couple spokes. The center spoke, and I'll show you a close-up on the next slide, has three creatures: a snake, a cockerel, and a pig, representing desire, greed, ignorance, and hate. And then the center, there's a ring around it, shows kind of like our idea of dark and light path, that that we choose those like and on the right side of, oops, I didn't mean to do that. So how do I get back in here now? So the wheel itself then has sections around those two main, around this axle here. And these correspond to 6 realms, also called the 6 lokas. And it's hard to tell perhaps in the picture, but the top is heaven, a heaven realm, and then is a demon realm, and then a hungry ghost realm. So like that would be your cocaine addict life.
That's really just society.
The hell realm.
No. The hungry ghost realm. I'll stop saying things.
Right, and then the animal realm, and then the pure human realm. And the outer spoke breaks down further different karmic conditions that lead to reincarnation in these different states. And so this is where some of the mechanism can be understood. And I'm going to revisit this again, but we'll go on. So rebirth and death in Buddhism are of supreme importance. Many meditations in Buddhism are about completion, the ending. And again, Dalai Lamas and other Charkούς reincarnate, and this proves the system of it, if you will. And it's pretty remarkable that for, like several centuries since the 14th century, the Dalai Lama has been able to reincarnate and be discovered and found, and there's a process that they have, and that individual has been able to plug into that system and come back. So this book is a guidebook to the afterlife, and in many respects it was essential to the continuation of the Tibetan Buddhist system. And there are some people who've talked about problems with the hierarchy and the theocracy of it, but certainly this idea of reincarnation is a keystone in Tibetan Buddhism. In fact, within the exile and the state we have with Buddhism growing in the West, particularly the U.S., and the Panchen Lama is right now in a dispute where China has said that they found the Panchen Lama, and there's a group, a monastery in the United States that says no, he's here. And so, I mean, the situation is breaking down. The system was contained within a small geographical area.
Well, Panchen Lama was imprisoned.
Right, and yeah, it's terrifically horrible. So, and for those kind of reasons, the Dalai Lama is now proposing that he may end the system. It'll stop with him, like Buddha said, I'm not living anymore. So that's yet to be determined. And but within all of that, death and rebirth are inimical to the problem of suffering and desire. So this practice is about explaining the role of karma and mitigating karma. Liberation is accomplished at death for an adept who consciously exits the body at death via a portal that's between the 2 hemispheres of the brain at the top of the head. And there's a practice that adepts study for years to able to move their energy in that central path related to the rising Kundalini, so that they can make it automatic. So that's one of the processes. And so the Tibetan Book of the Dead says, well, if you can't attain liberation, then there's other aspects, there's other options. And but just kind of summarizing, rebirth, according to Buddhism, is inevitable, it's immutable, it's the way reality works. The soul is not even personalized. Life is a gift for the soul to gain experience. Karma and desire drive the Dharma wheel. When we are in a state of transition, we can choose a path of light or dark. And again, here's a close-up of that. So this is the dark path, and here's the pig the bird and the snake, representing anger, ignorance, and greed. And one last thought about this from the Buddha in the Upanishad. As a man's desire is, so is his destiny, his will and deeds. A man acts according to the desires to which he clings. After death, he goes to the next world, bearing in mind the subtle impressions of his deeds, reaping his harvest. Thus, he who has desires is continue subject to rebirth. So that's an explanation of our being caught up on this wheel, captive of the wheel. And this idea of your choices is kind of sophisticated. So this is talking about the 6 lokas, and this comes also from the emotional nature that we carry. And so the hell realm is the lowest of all. The ghost is about greed and attachment. The animal realm has to do with instinct and fear. The human realm has to do with jealousy and competition and satisfaction. The deity realm is a place marked by pride. And the God realm can also be an imperfect place, and it can lead to complacency and laziness of, like people who have really great lives. They don't want to be bothered with the trials and tribulations of the world. They don't want to hear about global warming and homelessness and such. But at the point of death, which is really just another moment and a culmination of all the moments we've had, but we're kind of creatures of habit. So whatever our habit had been, we're taking with us to the end, puts us in a certain mind stream, a certain vibrational state, and that corresponds with, and I'm getting way ahead, but it's probably just fine, it corresponds to how we exit the body. And according to the work, there's 9 exit points, and 6 of them are primary. So mention the one at the crown of the head. We can exit through our eyes and ears, our nose, and the nose and mouth are kind of considered a similar portal. We can exit through the center of the body, the navel, and even the fingertips, which would be, and then we can exit through the sexual organs or the anus. And those all then correspond to these layers, these realms. So how we exit. And the karma that we've had affects which one of these realms we're going to be vibrating to a frequency at to go to. Because, as it is, so it is. So if we exit with a low-minded construct going on, we'll be in that vibration, and it's predictable. So again, there's this idea of right direction of thought when dying is important as well. So the last thought at the moment of death determines the character of the next life. The thought process of a dying person should be rightly directed. And it's a rite of continuing passage, not an end, but a journey, as we like to say in the West. And the law of attraction is the same principle. We have to be mindful of what we're thinking about the end of a situation, of our life story. And I know it's been talked about how what we think about, like breakups are a great example of ending. What we think about when we have one of those situations, or we leave a job, or something ends, how we think about it is the frequency we're projecting, and that attracts to us the next thing that comes. So if we're angry at that person who broke their word with us, then we're going to run into more encounters like that. Or if we're grateful and thankful, we're going to encounter something more positive and uplifting. So that's that idea also. So I mentioned that I wanted to understand this book better, so let's take a look at how the book is crafted. And again, it's the Great Liberation upon Hearing in the Intermediate State. So these are just examples. It was published originally in 1927 and immediately became a bestseller. These are examples of translations into multiple languages, multiple editions. I think this was one of the first ones. And this book has a deep connection to Theosophy. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we develop here. So this is the opening title page. And there it is, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the after-death experiences of the Bardo Plain according to Lama Kazi Dowa Samdrop, English rendering, and by W. Evans Wentz, W.Y. Evans Wentz. And this was a 1957 edition. This is an actual Pali text, and from which this translation was made. Let's take a look a bit more. So these two characters, Lama Kazi Dawa Samdrop and W. Evans Wentz. So there they are. And I find as I'm pouring through this text to elucidate it, just this picture, like they made the point of documenting their time together. This is in the early days of photography. So there they are in Sikkim, which is an area of Tibet, in 1919. And I'll start with Lama Kazi journey. And so this is Bengal, and here's part of Tibet and China. And so this area of Sikkim, and this work is very much part of that area. And there's various incarnations related to this school of Buddhism. But so he was a translator. He is considered the first translator of Tibetan Buddhist texts into English. He was a pioneer of transmitting Buddhism to the West, along with people like Alexandra David Neal, who he translated for as well. He was set up to be a headmaster at a school, and he was called a poor headmaster and even cursed by the demon drink, but he would wander out for days, neglecting students to contemplate metaphysics. He was the editor of the Sikkim Gazette for the Maharaja. He was also attended the Maharaja in Calcutta when the Prince of Wales came. He was an interpreter for Charles Bell and the 13th Dalai Lama at India when they went into the early exile. He also was at the coronation of King George that occurred in India, and so he was quite well placed. He was close to the Maharaja, and he had this calling of working with English and of working with the West. He had a very strong idea that this needed to happen, especially watching what was going on with the Dalai Lama. And so they meet at about 1919, and they work on this project. Within that time, he also gets transferred to the University of Calcutta. He works with Alexandra David Neal and another famous, John Woodruff, who was a British Orientalist. So he is a devoted translator, and he called Evans Wentz his living dictionary, and they had this moment together in time where they were committed to putting this book into English. And so Evans Wentz is a devoted theosophist. And as a young man, he comes to the writings of Madame Blavatsky and is very interested in comparative religion and world study. He studies at Stanford. He meets W.B. Yeats, studies Celtic lore, goes to Oxford, does field work on fairy folklore. His first book is an ethnographic study of fairy lore in England and in Great Britain and Ireland. And when he's at Oxford, he meets T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, who says, "You should go." And the works of Madame Blavatsky had inspired him, and he had this longing he wanted to go to the Himalayas and meet the great lamas of the East. And so on T. Lawrence's invite or encouragement, he goes, makes it to Egypt, Sri Lanka, and Ceylon, and is able to acquire a Pali manuscript of this text of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And it's like a lot of things seem to be falling together. And so then he's also, he goes to Adyar and spends time with the Theosophical Society in India. He meets Annie Besant, Swami Shamananda. He also meets Yogananda, Krishnamurti, Paul Brunton, Sri Krishna, and Maharishi. So he is making his way into this process of this exchange very deeply. And at some point he's got this text and he wants to make it to Tibet, and he eventually does. And when he meets Samduk, they are just magnetized to be together, and they immediately start trying to translate it. Very shortly, they have to part ways. He goes to study yoga, and Samduk goes to Calcutta, and he takes the work that and finishes it and becomes really the editor. So the translation is by Samduk, but the editing and the vision is Evans Wentz. So Samduk actually dies in 1922, and the book comes out in 27, so he never got to see it. And within that time, Evan Wentz does a couple more books. The Tibetan Book of the Great Yogi Milarepa, Tibetan Yoga and the Secret Doctrine, a homage to Blavatsky, and the Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation. Because of the war, he comes back to the United States in the 40s, does a preface to Yogananda, the autobiography of a yogi, also in print, and then he eventually ends up in San Diego and makes his way there, buys a mountain in Southern California as his retreat. But he continues to be devoted, committed Theosophist, writing for the publications, supporting both the Self-Realization Fellowship and the Theosophical Society. So part of this work is definitely out of the Theosophical experience. This book would not have existed without Madame Blavatsky. So that's a very interesting part of the legacy of Theosophy. And so I'll leave it with that. At his passing, the Tibetan Book of the Dead was read, and he is best known for his contributions to Tibetan wisdom in the West. One of the commentators on this book talked about this tradition in Buddhism called the Latsva, which is an editor-translator, and both Samduk and Evans had this deep calling. And I, as a reader, I deeply feel it every time I read it, this intense love that these transmitters put into this work. And there's a bit of urgency behind it, and to bring this forth, to bring this to birth. And this love of this tradition and the value of it, and the intense need, not need, but intention to put it to a new level. And sometimes it's been criticized that it has a little bit too much of a view of world religions. But I think that I agree that these two are part of this Latsava tradition in Buddhism. To continue then with the history of the book, I missed a screen. Don't know how to, oh here, we can go back right there. So Padmasambhava, and he was written about in the 12 Great Men by Manly Hall, 12 Great Beings, and Padmasambhava is the great Lama who brought Buddhism to Tibet. And he's called the Lotus Born, and many miracles and amazing superpowers associated with Padmasambhava. And he is the author of this original text according to the tradition. And he called it the Great Liberation. And he wrote it in the 8th century when Padmasambhava lived. And then it was transcribed by his student Yeshe Shogol. And, but they felt it was too much for people at that time, so it was buried in the Gampo Hills in central Tibet with 7 seals as a terma teaching. And terma means treasure. And this is part of Buddhism, that Buddhism, when it was founded in Tibet, put things that were hidden to be discovered later to revive the tradition and to be revealed when the time was needed for them to be revealed. So this is one of these termas, these treasures. And so it was discovered in the 14th century by the Tibetan Turtan, which means treasure finder, Karma Lingpa. So 600 years later, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Just the work was rediscovered in this area near around Gangkok, near Sikkim, and it was revealed. The Karma Lingpa was 15 years old, and this text is called the Shitro Gangpa. And it's actually larger than the Pali text that they translated, but the essential ideas are all there, the 6 bardos and the liberation through the intention of the peaceful and wrathful deities. So I just gave a picture of a mountainous place. And the tradition then was cultivated within that same area for several hundred years. And the names of the tradition that held it are the Nyingma tradition. And the Nyingma tradition is called the old school, the kind of ratty, gypsy Buddhist practitioners who aren't formal. And the Kagyu is the high, the exact opposite is the high academic school. And then there's the Gelug school, which is the Dalai Lama school. And there's a 4th school, which, but...
The 6 and 7.
Well, there are multiple schools, but the 4 primary ones. And so this teaching was very much nurtured and held in the Nyingma and the Kagyu schools. And they were institutionalized and then spread to the rest of Tibet. And fundamentally, it's called the Great Perfection Tradition, an innovative Tibetan system that we know of as Nyingma. There's a great story about the Nyingma that Namkhai Norbu recorded about a famous teacher who was a Nyingma teacher, and they would tend to be ruffians living in the mountains and, you know, maybe even eating meat sometimes, and not this formalized, but the Kagyu would send their students to go study with a great Nyingma teacher and live rough for a while. And there was this teacher, and he would say the mantra wrong. He was quite old, and the students, they're young college types, and they're like mocking this ruffian teacher. I mean, he's not ruffian like a cowboy ruffian, he's just rustic. And how could he really have any great understanding? He can't even say the mantra correctly. And but they do their required study with him. And the story is that then later he dies. And when great Buddhists die, there's many manifestations and many signs, something called cloud writing. And so in the sky that was like seen in the horizon for miles and miles, many distant places saw the mantra that he had been incorrectly saying written out incorrectly in the clouds. So just in case you weren't sure, here's some validation for you that this was a great Lama. So anyway, that kind of can maybe give you a sense of the differences. And interestingly, perhaps you recognize this. This is Chogyam Trungpa of the Kagyu school and the Shambhala tradition. And so we have this thing happen in the 20s where these two translators, these Latsvas, bring this text to the West. Immediately becomes a bestseller. There's a great interest in it, and now it's 1960s. And Chogyam Trungpa, who's a major abbot in the Kagyu school, comes to the West. He's from the Surmang monastery, which is where the Tibetan Book of the Dead work was sort of its zero level, ground zero. And so he comes to the West, and so now there's this other transmission that happens through the Kagyu lineage holder into the bringing Buddhism to the West. So there's something happening here, and it's bigger than we can even completely picture. But so he is a Turtan. He's the supreme abbot. He was a wild man. He drank. He was a poet. He's an artist. Originator of radical re-representation of Buddhism.
He went to universities and thoroughly studied Western literature. And
Absolutely, he's all of it. He founded the Naropa Institute, the Vajrahata University, and the Shambhala Institute. And he's translated many texts, so he reinvigorated this tradition in the West. And so there's that sharing. And I mean, if there's anyone who's like a poster boy for Tibetan Buddhism in the West, it's Chogyam Trungpa. And I don't know if you can tell in that picture, but he's giving the grand F-U finger. So he completely learned Western, practices.
And one of the reasons that he was frowned upon by so many people was he was trying to get the hippies to put on suits and ties and learn what mainstream society is about and be respectable.
Yeah, he was rattling everyone. I mean, there's a very famous story of at the Naropa Institute where it was with the famous poet W.S. Merwin, who's a very strong Buddhist practitioner, and they come, and his wife is with him, and he insists that everybody has to disrobe, and they're going to do this Buddhist practice nude. And several people left; they just couldn't handle that, and he was, going against people's ideas. But at this time, then in the 60s. The work is becoming very popular with the Beat generation, and so this is Timothy Leary and John Lennon and Yoko looking at the text. Timothy Leary rewrote a book called The Psychedelic Experience, claiming that it was the same as the Bardo trip, and I would say it's probably not so. William Burroughs became fascinated with it, and he claimed that he was being telepathically influenced by Tibetan adepts, and he wrote his book, The Wild Boys, was called The Book of the Dead. Another friend of William Burroughs named Brian Geeson wrote a book called The Last Museum, and turns this Beat Hotel into the Bardo Hotel, and Allen Ginsberg was involved. So this was a very strong factor, and see, here's the Beatles in India. And all of that led to this work having, I mean, it already was a bestseller, but having a very deep influence on the 60s and 70s. And I know the first time I read it, when I was about, 17, just a teenager. And I remember going, ah! It scared me. It was frightening. And it is, you have the 58 wrathful deities. And so I put it down. I couldn't even read it. It shocked me. But continuing with the transmission of this, the work's been criticized as being that the idea that it's the only book on Tibetan ideas of the afterlife is incorrect. It obscures these other traditions, like the Shitro tradition. And that there's a larger tradition that this work fits into. And also that Evans Wentz in his presentation was very much the anthropologist and the comparative religion academic, but and he also used archaic biblical language, these and thous. I find it to be pretty pure. All of that's fine with me. So here's a picture of Madame Blavatsky and Evans Wentz, and if you want to do an academic analysis, he's standing outside the monastery. He's not in it.
I have an original of that picture over there.
You do? Well, that'd be fun. So anyway, good night, you guys. So we're going to continue then with looking at the self-liberated wisdom of the peaceful and wrathful deities. And this is a rendering of the Zitro or Tantric mandala. And these mandalas are the idea of the portal between worlds. And I'm not going to spend a lot on that. Here's our cover page again. And now that I set up some background, I think we're just going to take a look at understanding this book a little better. And the idea is liberation, and it's religious instruction, esoteric teachings. Anyone can gain from using it. When you're in the bardo, if you can recognize it, you have a better ability to choose. And it's a guide for living as well as dying. Some of the questions that come up with how to navigate the afterlife are how to reach the ultimate realization. What happens when the consciousness doesn't reach full enlightenment? What do you do when you have to deal with the 6 realms of being, and how do you decide if you're going to go into the realm of devas, asuras, humans, rakshas, hungry ghosts, or the hell realms? How do you counsel a dying person? The dying person and those already deceased are presented with how to understand the interim period. And I mentioned some of that already. So the idea of the book is based on a premise of the bardo, sometimes called in between, and there's 6 bardos. And the bardo of waking life, which would be conception until the last breath. And then there's the bardo of dreaming, which is a separate thing, and Namkhai Norbu gave a great teaching on the yoga of dreaming and meditation in your sleep state. And then there's the bardo of meditating, which itself is its own state. So with the culmination of the last breath, or the approach of death, is the bardo of dying. And this is, the word is chikhe. And it covers in the text the signs of death, the swoon of death, and this and the first 3 days after. So this period is about a 3-day period of transition. And there's 2 stages. The first moment, which is called, again, the swoon of death, where the clear light is seen, and then the second clear light that emanates in those 3 days. And it is believed that this is terminated with the final internal breath, and that the body is still partially animated, and it takes 3 days for all of the consciousness to completely exit. And so, and then we know most traditions have injunctions against burial until 3 days and such, and so that 3 days is recognized as having a corollary in birth. When somebody's born, their family doesn't sleep for 3 days. You know, mom and pop and grandpa, everybody's like, they're not sleeping, and it has something to do with these karmic or bonds being formed. And then when somebody dies, the people who know the person don't sleep either. It's very much kind of a physical example of what's going on. So the next bardo is the bardo of the chonyed, and it begins with the last inner breath, and it be on the 4th day. And so within the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this process of reading the text begins on that 4th day, more or less, when And then it's a process that takes 49 days. And the first 14 are called the Bardo Vichonya, also called the Bardo of reality, or the intermediate state. And then from the 15th day to the 49th day is called the Siddha. And this would be the point where reincarnation is likely to occur. And the first 14 days, it's possible to still have a realization such that one could be liberated from the wheel of Dharma, from reincarnation. So let's take a look at the science of dying as explained in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. First of all, death is described as going through 5 stages of dissolution. And the first is earth dissolving into water, and this is where the person who's close to death, of course this is old age or illness, it doesn't cover being killed in a car accident or shot by a gun or something like that, but the element of earth dissolves, so the person stops eating, there's a feeling of powerlessness and heaviness. The next is the water dissolves into fire, and the person may feel a sense of drowning and then parchedness. And with this, they have difficulty swallowing and drinking water. And this could, really be just a few days away from the final passing. Along with that, there's less sense of pain and kind of a confusion. The next one is called where the fire dissolves into the wind. And this is where a person will feel very cold. No amount of blankets or clothing is enough. And they're barely drinking, and they're losing more and more awareness, and awareness is floating in and out. Finally, then, the last stage is the wind dissolving into space. And sometimes this is known for where the head sinks, the forehead, and it means death is within hours, 2-3 days maybe at the most. But the respiration becomes slow and rattled, leading to the last breath. The forehead sinks, profound silence, and there may be short bursts of energy, final words to a last breath. And then this dissolves into ether with the death swoon and the final breath. Light leaves the eyes, and in the West, death has occurred. And again, within the idea of Buddhism, this is the Chike Bardo, and it lasts a few days. And at this point, visions begin to arise according to the predominant karmic ideas and the mental ideas of the person. Good night. See you next time. So the Bardo Chike has some qualities, and I have been in a unique experience where I've been called a midwife for the dead. I've been the last person to photograph people, the last person on their cell phone, the last person to see a person, the last person to be spoke to many times. And so I sort of have, some sort of affinity with this topic. But I had a friend who died, and I was the last person to see him, indeed. And I had a powerful drive. And he was a person who lived the third shift life, and he was an astrologer, great astrologer, known in the area. And he had an inflamed, enlarged heart. And I had this urge one night to just go out, and it was like, 11 o'clock, and I put my clothes on and got ready to go out, to go to the east side, where all the university is and all the fun people are, where my astrologer friend Chris lived. I'm standing outside my door, I've locked it, and I'm going, where am I going? And I just followed the intent, and I ended up at Chris's house. And that was his last night on Earth. And we had the best time we ever had. And we talked about it being the best time we ever had. And I had the sensation that the walls were gone, that the space we were in was limitless. It was infinite. It was, and we shared memories and projections. And I was saying he should, go to Hawaii because he had some money and it would be paradise for him. And he was, not feeling well. little knowing that he was really on his last hours. And I left at 3 in the morning, and I had to run back and say, oh, I couldn't leave you. I left my keys. And then the call came the next day that he had died. And I was the last person to have seen him. The neighbor came in, and he was, and I had a vision of him, and I spoke to him, and he taught me a lot about the afterlife because he was an occultist. And so he's another example of a traveler who came from that realm where no one is born. But I had a picture of him at his kitchen table having breakfast and collapsing, and that's what they told me happened. But when I was talking to him the first 3 days, he was flying around everywhere. He was like, I'm free, wee, you know, like riding on the swing, and you can do that in that state. And he was completely connected. And I said, so Chris, what was it like, that last moment? And he was one of those people who also said, he was kind of cynical about the whole suffering thing and being trapped in a body. He was like looking forward to leaving. And I said, so when it came to that moment when you knew, what was that like? And he said, he was a wee bit scary. I asked him if he was scared, even though he had been somebody who greatly longed for that consummation. And then I said, how did you know? And that this was it. And he said, when I felt the blood pouring forth out of my mouth. So his heart had just exploded, really. And he also told me, and I said, well, what was it then like when that passed and you're now past your last breath? And he said it was like 1,000 bees buzzing. He gave me that message of this like gigantic thunderous noise. Maybe like even the wong of the Beatles' Day in the Life. And I think I'm going to skip to this screen first because that's where I am. Where did I go with that? Did I miss something? Yeah, so this is the depiction of death, the immediate Chique Bardo. And so everybody who knew him said they were being visited by him, and he was in exaltation. And having been involved with being present to a lot of people's death, I've seen other phenomena. There'll be messages and dreams before and afterwards. Grandma will come and visit you and tell you something important before she dies. When Martha died in those first 2 weeks, she wanted to get my attention. She once pulled the keys out of my purse and threw them on the sidewalk. I don't know how it happened, but I knew it was her. Furniture, you know, will be knocked off walls and things like that. So that paranormal state. And that's all like appropriate in the first 2 weeks after death. When we start hearing about it going on for 50 years or, 2 years, then we got an aberrant situation. Astral visitations, ghostly events, synchrony. The person may feel possible confusion and sadness at the loss of their life. Oh, Jeannie, I'm really dead. That's what my sister said to me the day after she died. And I found her in the morgue, and her consciousness coming to me, and I saw this boxy thing with her presence, and I saw that I had to like turn this thing and open it up to get in there to talk to her. And then she said that, oh, I'm dead, and I said, yes, you are. And so then I helped her let go. She was very much a person grounded on earth, and so she was clinging to her body. And this,
might have just been a part of her.
Yeah, and there was this great exaltation around her that she wasn't even quite able to. There were all these flowers around her, and everything was lovely. The light was there, and that's one of the things in the description of the Chique Bardo, is the idea of this great light. And so she had to let go of her body, and I took her back to when we were kids and sang a song, come out wherever you are, and helped her let go. A lot of times we have the people report in the West the near-death experience, and so much of our thinking is to follow the crowd and to follow the bandwagon. So we have the NDE, and everybody sees a beam of light. But in much of the literature and in this book, it doesn't say much about a beam, but just that there's this total light, the great illumination, the clear light, which is the light that we enter in meditation, and that gigantic awareness available to us. Again, there's a subtle animation of the body within those first 3 days, and a fading awareness and presence into this world. There's still like my sister clinging to her body, but eventually letting go. And presence expressing in things like beams of light, cloud riding, and other natural phenomena that culminates in the final inner breath. I remember being at Richard's mother's passing, her funeral, the 3rd or 4th day, in this lovely church, and there's this gigantic beam of light that came through it. So I saw that as clearly her presence bearing witness to this honor, this memorial for her. And I've seen that many times with people passing. So there's this phenomena with death in those first 3 days. And the Bardo doesn't, the Tibetan Book of the Dead doesn't teach any action in that time, but just understanding it. The next slide I have is about the rainbow body, which is a different experience. And it's an experience within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition as a rare phenomenon. And it occurs with lamas, teachers, people who are great adepts, who are masters, who have attained enlightenment or are realized beings. And in some ways, the rainbow body is a testament to that attainment. What happens with them is that we talked about the dissolution of the elements in death, and that 3rd or 4th from the fire to air, they remain in that state for a long time, and they're like nearly dead. And they may be in there for months, weeks, barely breathing. And what's happening is the consciousness is going in, and it's clearing karma. And the body is literally shrinking. And it's not corrupting. So this body is not really consuming food or water. It's breathing a very elongated process. But the consciousness is evolving out with almost perfect awareness, if you will. And then so at the point of death, when that person dies, their body would be very small, sometimes like the size of a 4-year-old child or something. And there will be no signs of corruption, and they call it the rainbow body. There can be other states. And at the time of the death, there will be many signs and amazing phenomena, like the cloud riding of that Nyingma teacher, where it was seen for miles and miles. Thunder, lightning, healings, revelations, gifts, as the being spreads karma to the benefit of all. So that, again, the body mass may stay in this odd form, but the consciousness is leaving through this fissure at the top of the head called the Brahmahandrara technique, or the channel. And before a person, an adept, comes to this, they've spent a lot of their meditating life developing that process. And it involves sending energy through the central channel. Normally it circulates on the 2 outer right and left channels. And so I'm just noting that, and that's kind of above and beyond what the Tibetan Book of the Dead is about. But going back to a normal death, there is a point where then the body, the consciousness is exiting, and I mentioned this earlier, there's 9 apertures, 6 primary. Above the navel is good, and the crown of the head, the eyes and the ears, the mouth and the nose, the hands and the navel, the sexual organs, or the the anus. And that point of exit corresponds to points on that Dharma wheel, and is a vibrational state where you leave, you're on that other side, that's the frequency that you're at. Another factor that the book is based on is the 49 days, and that's 7 weeks. And Evans Wentz presents in one of his introductions quite a bit about the business of the 7 rays and the 7 days and the 7 powers of the 7 vowels. So this is an interesting mandala with 7 rings around the Buddha and the Lama, and I won't belabor that. So here's the instructions before the death. Maybe I'll go back. That's such a pretty mandala. And I do acknowledge and give thanks to the knowledge holders who've carried this tradition now and then. And these are some of the sites that made it possible. And I acknowledge the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha in this sharing. So to look at the book, it begins with an acknowledgement of Padmasambhava. It talks about the great liberation, and then the transference of the consciousness, and the reading of the photo in the next bardo, which happens on the 4th day. So there's the recognition of Padmasambhava, who wrote this down. And this teaching is also called the profound doctrine of the emancipating of the consciousness upon the peaceful and wrathful deities. So this is a classic mandala of the 42 peaceful deities and the 58 wrathful deities. So it begins with part 1, talking about the last breath. O nobly born, listen, now thou art experienced the radiance of the clear light of pure reality, recognize it. O nobly born, thy present intellect in real nature is void, not found into anything as regards characteristics, colors, naturally void as the very reality of the all-good. And so this is to be read a few times. And even though we're recognizing it's all void, there's a great deal of depth about it. And then the second stage of the bardo of death, again, the second clear light is sustained for those several days. It says, O thou of noble birth, meditate upon thy own tutelary deity. Do not be distracted, earnestly concentrate thy mind on thy deity. Be thus being set face to face, even those who would not be expected to recognize the bardo are undoubtedly certain to recognize it. So this is about recognizing that you're in the afterlife. And this is a sand painting being dusted away. So part 2 then begins with the Chonyad bardo, the experiencing of reality on the 4th day. And I love this work because it has this very practical statements. Although the clear light of reality dawned upon thee, thou wert unable to hold on, and thou hast to wander here. Now henceforth thou art going to experience the other 2, the Chonyad bardo and the Sidpa bardo. Thou will pay undistracted attention to that which I am about to set thee face to face and hold on. So this is what the practitioner reads to the deceased person. And at this point they may have already been gone through a process of a funeral, but they're read to in spirit, maybe the chair that they sat on or something like that. O nobly born, when the body and mind were separating, thou must have experienced a glimpse of the pure truth, subtle, sparkling, bright, dazzling, glorious, and radiantly awesome, an appearance like a mirage moving across the landscape in spring, time in our continuous stream of vibration. Be not daunted, nor terrified, nor awed. This is the radiance of thy own true nature. Recognize it. So from the very beginning, it's telling the person that this is the things you're seeing, that there's all these apparitions that arise, are the emanation of your own mind. And truly, this is also what we need to tell ourselves in physical reality. So this is the natural sound of thy own self. Be not daunted, nor terrified, nor awed. So words of encouragement. So in the first 6 days is the emanation of the 42 peaceful deities. They're broken down into the 5 families, the 5 Buddha families: Ratnasambhava, Aksovya, Vairocana, Amitabha, and Amaksadi. And in Buddhism, there's a lot of numbers of things. So with this, there's the 5 lights, the 5 deities, the 5 elements, the 5 wisdoms, and even the 5 poisons. So on the very first day, O nobly born, thou hast been in a swoon during the last 3½ days. This is very, very concrete. As soon as thou art recovered from this swoon, thou wilt have the thought, what has happened? So that you will now recognize the bardo. At the time, all the samsara will be in revolution, and the phenomenal appearances that thou wilt see will be the radiance and deities. Again, the these and thous are a little hard to take in today's world, but so within that process, the first 6 days is a series of beautiful text that's repetitive verse, and it brings one by one a residue of the different peaceful deities, and then a dull light is also shining from the devas and who represent the bad karma, and so that the consciousness is drawn to one and the other, and the encouragement is to not pay attention to the dull lights of the familiar world that you came from, and to go to the bright Buddha light. So on day 1,
sometimes it's not necessarily to the bright light.
right, but they describe these dull lights, smoky lights, faded lights that are emanating simultaneously. And all of this, of course, is coming out of projections in the mind as the being is still conscious, and this is the residue from the life experience. So the first day, the white Buddha from the central realm, Vairocana, also called Vajrasattva, is called, and he's described as sitting on a lion throne bearing an 8-spoked wheel, and all of these symbols of Buddhism are brought forth in this process. And I'll read this once and then. Alas, when wandering in samsara, because of intense stupidity on the radiant light path of the Dharma Dhatu wisdom, may I be led by the Bhagavan Vajrasattva. May the Divine Mother of infinite space be my rear guard, and may I be led safely across the fearful ambush of the Bardo. May I be placed in the state of the all-perfect Buddhahood. So this is seen as kind of a borderline, a borderland, and that one is traversing. So in the second day, a similar verse is read, and in this day, the blue Buddha is brought forth and emanates. Water will shine in blue color, a 5-pronged dorji, an elephant throne, and so on. And the third day then is the yellow southern realm, yellow in color, bearing a jewel, seated upon a horse throne, embraced by the Divine Mother. And all of these vibrational states, that these colors are affinities that we have individually. And you know, there's these 5 Buddha families. And then in the red western realm, the red light of the element of fire will shine from the western realm of happiness. Amitabha bearing a lotus, seated upon a peacock throne. And all of these are also with their consorts, and I'm not showing them embracing, but that's also an image that's presented. On the 5th day is the green Buddha from the northern realm of success and best action. And So this process begins, and it's said again and again, these are emanations from your own mind. And on day 6, they all come forth, the 5 divine fathers and mothers and the 5 Buddhas. So here they are in a mandala around the central one, and up in the corners, and they're with their consorts. And so that's day 6, and then day 7 is a big change where 10 deities they're not so much peaceful deities, and they're not the wrathful deities, but they're the dakinis and knowledge holders, and they're associated with karma. And some of the images are very disturbing, but it says, "O nobly born, listen undistractedly. The varied color radiance of the propensities will come to shine. The knowledge-holding deities from the holy paradise will come to receive one, and he will be holding a skull cup filled with blood and a crescent knife, dancing and making the mudra fascination with his hand held aloft." And so this is when we start to meet up with some of the more frightening aspects of the vision. So this is a Buddha. Now the dakinis, they are standing on human beings, they're crushing them, and
But simultaneously they represent paradise.
Right, they represent letting go of our attachments to material existence, and they're depicted in this very dramatic and even disturbing way. So here's another version then of all 42 deities assembled on a mandala. With on this one I have the green Buddha in the center, and we don't have time to count them. And here's again another mandala, and the reminder is to think of the compassionate one, to have peace and to recognize that this is coming from your mind. It's really your monkeys. And on day 8 emerges the wrathful deities, and this is an emanation of the Lord of Death, Yamatanka. And one by one, on day 8 through the next week, different Harukas come forward, and it says, "Fear not, be not awed. Know it is the embodiment of your own intellect, as it is thine own deity. Be not terrified, be not afraid, for in reality it is the Bhagavan Vajrasattva, the Father-Mother, who you saw on the first day." So this is a very frightful emanation of that same being, the wrathful form of that compassionate, benevolent Buddha. And with each day, simultaneously with the recognition, liberation will be obtained. If they be recognized, merging thyself is at one-ment. So the person is encouraged to merge with that vision. And then here's day 9, the blue Haruka. On day 10 is the yellow Haruka. On day 11 is the red Haruka. On day 12 is the green. And then on day 13, the 8 animals and the Temanas appear. And these are, creatures who are disturbing and animal-headed. And again, this is depicted as emerging from our brain, our consciousness. From the east, the dark brown lion-headed. The south, the red tiger-headed. From the west, the black fox-headed. So these aren't even human creatures. And again, badly formed ideas, if you will. Here's another image of the Tamanas, and their blood drinking, and again, it's a reminder: fear not, know them to be the thought forms of thy own intellectual faculties. On day 14, the whole assemblage of wrathful deities appear. So we have the 28 of them together. And then again, another enjoinder, recognize whatever shines to be the thought forms of thy own intellectual faculties. So this reminder is persistent every day that you're in this phenomenal space of all kinds of immediate manifestation, and these things that are the manifestations of karma and thought in unedited form appear, but they're really yours. They're yours and yours alone. And that's the beginning of being able to say, okay, I guess I can handle this. But it is pretty terrifying. And here, this is another rendition of the terminas all together with the animal-headed creatures. And the closing statement on day 14 is, when suffering miseries of karmic propensity, may the blissfulness of the clear light dawn, may the 5 elements not arise, but may I behold the realms of the 5 orders of the enlightened ones. So instead of seeing these wrathful deities, these unfriendly dakinis, may I see the 5 Buddhas. And there's the 5 Buddhas. And here's Ratnasambhava, the Lord of Death. And it ends with, if nevertheless, despite everything done, in this stage of the bardo, recognition has still not been effective, there being danger of one wandering into the bardo of the Sidpa, and the setting face-to-face therein will be shown its details. So if at this point you still haven't escaped, then you're going to fall into the next stage, the Sidpa bardo. And that's where reincarnation can occur. And there's a concluding statement. Hence it should be proclaimed in the ears of all living persons. It should be read over the pillows of all persons who are ill. It should be read at the side of all corpses. It should be spread broadcast. Those who meet with this doctrine are indeed fortunate. It is difficult to find and difficult to comprehend. Liberation will be with you through simply not disbelieving it upon hearing it. Therefore, treat this doctrine very dearly. It is the essence of all doctrines. And so, and that's some of the deep love of those translators, Evans Wenson, Sandup, honoring this tradition. So it closes with that, and so in book 1 we saw the description of the moment of death, and then the Chonyad Bardo with the days 1 through 14, and the peaceful deities and the wrathful deities. And then another portal into the Sidpa Bardo. And what happens here is a thing called the judgment, and the method to close the womb door, and the instructions on how to choose a womb. And it gives some originating information about meeting the Lord of the Death, and he's very ugly, and there's a dance being done. Here's another representation. Good night, you guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. And here's other representations of Yamatanka. And one of the statements, I really like this image, that it talks to the person and says, these are the indications. It says, have you been traveling freely? You can go through a mountain. You can go to all parts of the earth. Have you been able to do that? These are signs that you're in the Sidpa Bardo, or the mental body. At this time, happiness and misery will depend upon your karma. You will see your own home, your attendants, your relatives, and your corpse and think, now I'm dead, what shall I do? And being oppressed with sorrow, the thought will come to thee, oh, what I would not give to possess a body. And so thinking, thou will be wandering hither and thither, seeking a body. And then this leads to this process called the judgment. And this judgment process is probably where he got the name, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because it's borrowing from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where there's this process at death with the heart is taken and put on a scale and weighed, and it has to be light as a feather.
Which is really the book of coming forth by day.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And so another misnomer. And so in this process, it explains that you're being tortured. I mean, the executive furies of the Lord of Death will place around thy neck a rope and drag thee along. It was bad before, it's even worse now. He will cut off thy head, extract thy heart, pull out thy intestines, lick thy brain, drink thy blood, eat thy flesh and gnaw thy bones. But thou wilt be incapable of dying. Although the body will be hacked to pieces, it will revive again. The repeated hacking will cause pain and torture, even at the time that the pebbles are being counted out, and there's this process where they weigh pebbles black and white. Be not frightened nor terrified, tell no lies, and fear not the Lord of Death. The body, being a mental body, is incapable of dying, even though beheaded and quartered, and so on. The Lords of Death are your... Yeah, the Lords of Death are your own hallucination. The desire body is a propensity that cannot be avoided. And so these are the hallucinations that are generated. And like here they show this idea of the judgment, there's a mirror. And karma is also called a mirror. And so in the mirror is an animal being killed, which is seen as an example of a great crime. And here are pictures of bodies being boiled and put in vats and hacked and the blood being drained. And so this all kinds of, think of all these fears and terrifying apparitions as being thy own deity, as your own compassionate one. So that's the advice that's given again and again. This is yours. It's not external.
It's an attachment to the clip-out, their shells in which we inhabit through lifetimes.
Mm-hmm. And so this comes back to the problem of suffering. And again, it's the mind can create this so quickly, and it's manifested. And there's the enjoinder to remember the principles of Buddhism, the body, mind, and speech, the Sangha, the Dharma, and the Buddha, and the idea of this last statement, thinking, put thy trust in them and exercise sincere love towards them. Whatever's done left behind will end to the benefit. Therefore, the exercise of love is of much importance. Do not forget it. And this is a picture of the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the weighing of the scale and the idea of finding balance. Once this judgment process is ended, it again goes back to this idea of where did the body exit? What plane was it on? Was it, and so that takes us back to this idea of the 6 lokas. Is it a green light, a white light, a red light, and which world? So the world of the diva is white, Ashura is green, the human is yellow, the brute is blue, and the preta, or ghost, is red, and the smoky is the dark hell world. And I have a picture here of an intensely bright sunset and many of these colors. And this idea of the color vibration is very significant. And I heard it described too that so now with this approach of the 6 lokas, this is the point where you are approaching reincarnation. When you're seeing this light, it's really the light from the human world coming in. You are close to reincarnation. And the ideas that was taught to me was that the light from when we make love, it's a remarkable thing. It's a portal to the other dimensions, and it generates a vibration, a color, a light, that feeling, that energy emanates. And so there's this process where we can start to see this light, and the light that we see is vibrationally equivalent to where our mind is at. So if you're in the light of, I want to make a great concert, and that's driving you to go back to life, you'll be drawn to a light that has musical quality. Or if you want to get even with that guy who killed you, you're going to be drawn to a light that is full of fury, that will become in agreement with where you're at. So this part of the book is about the choice of the 6 lokas. And to some of what they show is that some of it is you have to be really vigilant, and it comes out of where you are. So if there's any choice, it's the choice to not, go there. It's just to be with the compassionate one. Otherwise, we're kind of hooked in. The law of attraction is working. And it says that, at this point, is especially important, whichever light shineth, meditate upon it as being the compassionate one. From whatever place the light comes, consider it the compassionate one. This is exceedingly profound. And so the compassionate one is your Buddha, your tutelary deity. So then the last part of the book, the entire book, is in the Siddha Bardo, the method to close the womb or to choose a new life. And there's 5 methods for closing the womb. The first one is to meditate on the father and mother as a good chain of karma, to bow down and to ask for guidance. 3 is has to do with attraction and repulsion, and if you're attracted to the mother and repulsed by the father, that means you'll be a male. Of course, they're not taking into account transgender identities and all of that, but what's happening with the Bardo is it changing with our times. But the 4th method is to step away from hallucination and to recognize that these again are your emanations. And the 5th is to say all substances are mine, own mind, and it's unborn and unceasing. If that doesn't work, then they give you instructions on choosing a womb door. And again, we kind of looked at that already, the process of colors that you're vibrating to. So the last statement is to accept the influence of karma, that a good womb may appear, and to not trust your judgment even. So the art of to do as follows: even though a womb may appear good, do not be attracted. If it appears bad, have no repulsion. To be free from repulsion and attraction, or from the wish to take or to avoid a new life. To enter into the mood of complete impartiality is the most profound. So that's the best way to go into the next life. And so we talked about this idea of the matter of attraction in the choice of the light that you're drawn to. And we're almost done. I've made this little image here of the mind with the brain. And so much of this book keeps emphasizing that this is all emanating from your brain. And I'm wondering if, with future brain mapping, if they may find some corollary between, even a color or something that aligns with the emphasis that we may have in our own particular nature, but that would really correspond with these visions, of the many deities all projected out in certain patterns and form, if there may be a scientific corollary to it.
One thing that isn't taken into consideration enough, though, is that this comes out of this in the fetal development and the seed of life as it pertains to the flower of life and the development of the first unicellular aspects of our being. And this pops out of here, so these two are
right, the heart, and there's a major set of nerves all culminating from the brain to the heart. Absolutely. So there's the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities, and this is Tara, one of my tutelary deities that I meditate to. And Tara was a Tertan teaching. There's a new 21 phrases. And this is a teacher I give honor to, Namkhai Norbu. And he's done a lot in the West. And he's also from the Nyingma tradition, this tradition. And I have a little summary. We can probably forego that because we're getting tight for time. And just a great recognition of how Evans Wentz was definitely part of this Theosophical tradition, and this work, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or the Great Liberation Upon Hearing, is something that is within the Theosophical legacy. And here's Buddha's words: "Get thee away from life, lust and conceit, ignorance, from distractions, craze. Throw off the chain of birth and death." So that's what I'll leave you with. And thank you all. Does anybody have thoughts, questions? Any big ahas or corrections?
Well, this is relatively trivial, but maybe. But the incorrect chanting of the mantra,
Yeah.
I would like to know what it was, because maybe it was a correction.
The story
the
is...
point of the story is that it's the feeling and the gnosis of the thing that counts, not the symbols that are very useful. It's important to know the proper symbols for some.
He's exactly right, and I think it was Om Mani Padme Hum, the great mantra that he was mispronouncing. And again, as Phoenix said, it's not so much what it specifically was, but the heart of it. So, but I heard one person say it was Om Mani Padme Hum, and I just always see that image of the clouds being written with the word. Yeah, there was a slide in here that I had of the eyes, and the day Martha died, who inspired me to work on this for a lecture, I went to a place where we used to meditate, and it was out in nature, and it was getting to be sunset, and I looked out at the western skies. I was leaving, and the clouds had formed into two eyes, like the image of the Buddha meditating. So I thought, wow, that's pretty incredible to see that kind of an emanation. And she was a teacher for me, and she was someone who was deeply involved in the Dharma, and so it was not unlikely that something like that would happen. One day I was thinking about her, and it was like day 14, and I was thinking, oh, I'm not getting so many messages from Martha. She must be, fading into that state of the... And just as I had that thought, I'm driving along, and it was really a cloudy day. There was this great pop through the clouds of a beam of light and a rainbow. That was only like a little rainbow. It was only like, a 20% arc. And there was someone with me in the car, and I was saying this about Martha, and then we both saw it, and the beam of light was great. It was like, whoa.
When that happens to me,
Yeah.
it's always a friendly reminder that when we leave this world, time, as we can possibly conceive of it here, doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. And that we have that ability to move from place to place. We're not fettered by form and matter.
If I'm not mistaken, one of your first slides mentioned the soul is not personalized.
Yeah.
So who or what is experiencing all this?
Well, we're part of, it's seen as being part of consciousness itself. And that idea of not being personalized is sort of compared to the more Western or Judeo-Christian idea. If the Western has an idea of reincarnation, the soul is like pictured as having an identity, that's made of all these lifetimes. But that's a little more personalized in the Buddhist view, but at the same time, there's a contradiction because the Dalai Lama keeps coming back, as the Dalai Lama, so there is an individuation happening there.
Well, every cell in our body is a separate entity, but we're all one physical being in this body.
Like that. So Richard, do you have any thoughts for us?
I wanted to remember Christopher's last name.
Oh, Christopher Pierce.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it impacted a lot of people on it. Wasn't Martha Johnson, is it?
No, I don't know. I want to just keep her name first name. Yeah. Christopher Pierce, the astrologer, said that the moment of death was like a 10,000 buzzing bees, a noise like that.
Well, it's different for everybody.
Well, in this text, they do note that they call it 10,000 thunders, and I didn't.
Some people hear like a trumpet kind of sound. And I like that, anyways.
Yes, I think the idea is that there's a noise that is quite astounding in its scope.
I wanted to ask you a question. So, some of us start upon these paths and, the ways that we start upon them. Like, I came across a book in my teenage years too that I was really, and I've always wanted to read this. I've never really taken the time to do it yet, so this is probably the most comprehensive thing I've ever seen on it yet so far. So my question to you though, that, as we start upon this though, what I want to ask, is it appropriate to do this even for somebody who's maybe not into Buddhism or meditating, or is it like you're putting something upon them, or you know what I mean?
Right.
Is it for us to do it for them, and is it welcomed, or is it?
Well, I'm a renegade, and I have read it several times, and every time I've had, revelations, breakthroughs, great insights, great experiences. So I think it is really meant for everybody, whether you're a Buddhist practitioner or not. And I have found it brought me more into Buddhism as I read it multiple times. And it was a curious thing. To me, the story of Evans Wentz and Sandhu coming together is kind of magical and seem to be moved by a higher power. And sometimes it feels like that is behind it. And so it's about letting yourself follow it and, being inspired.
It's more for like, what is it like for the person on the other side? Is that kind of acceptable or not? Because
if you're somebody they loved and you're reading it to them, I'm sure no matter what you're reading to them.
Sure. Okay, so let me be clear about what I'm dancing around a little bit. Right? It's not like, friends who are close to you, they have somebody die. And you feel them kind of coming to you, sort of. And, in the ways that we experience those things. Before they even tell you. And before, you're just noticing things. Like you're saying, you had the intention to go to your friend's house that night, the calming. Those are the kinds of things like that.
Right. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead doesn't say a lot about that, really. Okay. And but it does say things like, you're dead, pay attention, But as an observer in my own experience, and I have seen there's phenomena that surrounds both birth and death that are almost parallel, and that and sometimes from my own experience I wasn't seeking it, but I was brought into it. So I can say that would be something to listen to from that as a separate thing. And I kind of get annoyed with these ghost hunter TV shows and stuff. It's like, you're kind of like poking a stick at it. And it's completely out of, consciousness with, what we're dealing with, this portal between different worlds and different lives and where consciousness resides. But there are phenomena that are consistent. So getting messages, having dreams, feeling a person floating around is normal. And there's also a point when it fades.
Yeah,
and if it's still going on many, many months later, There's maybe something that like it's time to call a therapist, you know, because there's something that's not getting resolved, or a shaman or something to help with the spirit resolving it. And I appreciate your question, though. I hope that helped.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jean.
Yeah, I think we probably should settle down.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, good job.
Okay.